Level up your business. Get my free insights every week at stevepreda.com/newsletter. Good day, listeners. Steve Preda here, and my guest today again is Justin Nassiri, the founder and CEO of Executive Presence, a fully managed LinkedIn thought leadership service for C-suite executives at growth stage B2B companies. Justin, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back. Thanks, Steve.
So we just reminisced that it was 3 years, almost to the day that you came here, and I can't believe it feels like yesterday. But your business has grown dramatically during that time. So I think you have some new insights that you'll be able to share with us, I'm sure.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Yeah, we just made the Inc. 5000 list, which is the first time for me. I've never been on that before, but celebrating that.
Yeah, congratulations. That's a great milestone to hit. And then you only started in 2022, right?
Yeah.
So pretty freshly minted, fast-growing Inc. 5000. So my question to you is, what is your personal why, and how are you manifesting it in executive presence in your business?
I think there's a very potent macro or micro why for me, and then probably a broader why. I think that the biggest why for me right now, like many parents, is my kids. And I think I've got a 3 and a 7-year-old. And so when I think of my professional life, I certainly think about not just providing for them, but also trying to set an example of someone who is trying to do their best and trying to stretch and trying to grow. And so I think that's probably the highest leverage that I have. But I think the through line in the companies that I've done is just the value of human connection. My first company was all about companies using Instagram in a way to be more authentic and more genuine with their community. And that's, very true to what we're doing now at Executive Presence, is just really helping people connect to other people. In this case, it's executives using LinkedIn to connect with a broader audience. But I really feel like that human connection is so important. And I think becoming even more important in the era of AI. So that's a little bit more specific why in what I do right now.
Yeah, it's fascinating how human connection is evolving in the age of AI. And I agree. I mean, I see that because there's so much more noise out there, the human connection is perhaps more important than ever. People want to make sure that they are talking to authentic and hearing from authentic people who have authentic lived experience. So how does that impact communication for executives on LinkedIn? How do they have to evolve their voice or how they approach things?
I think if you look at LinkedIn in particular right now, I think it still remains the place where the largest source of our professional network. And so I think there's still a lot of value there. And I think that LinkedIn is facing a lot of growing pains. Specifically, I think that there's 2 things driving it. One is more people are just showing up on the platform. The secret is out and people realize that there's a value to LinkedIn. So just all things else equal, more people are more active on LinkedIn, which generates a lot of noise. And then the second thing is AI is making it easier to create content. So I think it's creating not just more content, but lower quality content. And then the third thing is it does seem as if LinkedIn is following what Facebook did over a decade ago and saying, look, to get reach, you got to put money into ads now. And we saw that transition with Facebook company pages a long time ago, but it really does feel like you cannot get as much visibility today as you could have 2 years ago unless there's some sort of ad buy behind it. And so I think those are kind of the 3 problems. I think that the answer is there's still value in showing up, but I think that you have to show up even more human. I think that the experiences that make you unique and the mistakes that make you who you are and the things that you know and the stories that you can tell, those still hold value, and that differentiates you from generic or AI generated content. And I also think that there's a value to using LinkedIn ads, and we can talk about that, but I think that that has to be part of one's strategy now if you're trying to significantly use LinkedIn for what it's good for, which is brand building.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe this is a side question, and then we're going to talk about the framework, but as I understand, LinkedIn now allows individuals to also boost their posts as opposed to just companies, which used to be in the past. So how does that impact companies? Is there more emphasis now? Is emphasis shifting to individual posts because there's no real reason to build up the company pages? How is that evolving?
I mean, 4 years ago when I started the company, before these thought leader ads, these individual people ads were a thing, I still would have said to you, like, look, there's not much value in company pages. People connect with other people. They're not going to connect with a faceless organization. So even 4 years ago, I would have said, man, if you really want to raise visibility for your organization, you've got to do that through your key leaders. You've got to do that through actual names and faces and voices and perspectives. And I think that the ads makes that even more pronounced now, because I can now take my personal post as Justin Nassiri. If it does well on LinkedIn, I can put a $50 or $500 ad buy against it. And I can make sure that essentially specific people are going to see my post. If I'm selling to CEOs of tech companies in Cincinnati that have grown 10% last year and they've been at their company for 5 years, I can have an insane level of targeting, and I can put my personal content in front of them in a way that most people still don't realize is an ad. It will say promoted by, and then the company name. So promoted by executive presence. Most people when scrolling don't even notice that.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity then to take very human and personal content and put it in front of exactly whoever you're trying to get in front of.
Yeah, I love that. You also say on your LinkedIn page that it takes for an executive only 90 minutes a month to actually work with you guys and have you amplify them. So how do you extract all those personal stories and experiences? What is your framework for that, so that
Yeah.
you be an executive and be able to create those posts without them having to be involved or more
Yeah,
involved?
I think the framework is pretty universal for anyone listening. We tend to start with a content strategy, and the way that we typically will start is we'll say, okay, 40% of the content we would call industry thought leadership. And that is great if you can talk about current events and relate them to your industry. It's great if you can share things about your industry that no one knows or that you disagree with people. But view that 40%, which is the biggest of any of the categories, as really the education, as the subject matter expert. You are showing up as an authority in cybersecurity, or you are showing up as an authority in leadership, or you're showing up as an authority in B2B supply chain. And I think the key here is the more niche, the better. The more narrow, the better. We are not Joe Rogan. We're not trying to get 300 million people to look at your content. We want to get in front of a very narrow group of people, typically prospects, customers, potential employees, potential investors. We really want to narrow where your voice can be fairly large in a very finite realm. So that's the industry thought leadership piece. The second one, about 30% of the content, we call it leadership and career journey. And what we're trying to do here is a blend of humanizing the executive while also giving them credibility. And so if we are working with someone who is a CEO at a company, well, they've done things prior to that. So what did they learn in college or a previous workplace? What was a mistake that they made? What was a mentor that said something to them? So that's a way of us imparting one of their values or something that they know, but wrapped in a story from their history, which humanizes them. And that would be, generally 30% of the content. 20%, obviously, they're doing this to promote their company. So 20% would be about their company, spotlighting an employee, recent events, things like that. Again, trying to do it through stories if possible. And then the last 10% is usually the highest performing 10%. And that is, we would call that work adjacent content. So we want to, again, make them a three-dimensional person. What do they do outside of the office? Is that family? And we usually use what we call the dinner party test for this. If you are with prospects and potential employees, what's fair game to talk about over dinner and drinks? Some people would definitely talk about their kids. Some people would never talk about their kids. Some would talk about their hobbies. Some would never talk about that. So that's a good filter to figure out what could they talk about that's not just always talking shop. So that's kind of the framework that we use. But I think that the way that we harvest this information is really the skill of the people that I hire on my team, is people who are really good at pulling insights out of someone and getting someone to open up and having that heat-seeking missile approach of like, what is a story that they're sitting on that they don't even realize is a compelling story? And that's one thing that has stood out. Some of the best performing LinkedIn posts, the person didn't even think that that would be interesting to anyone else. We're often not the best filter for ourselves of what's going to land. And that's one of the values of LinkedIn, is that you can actually put out ideas and stories and insights and very quickly, in an 18-hour time period, get signal from the market if people value that from you or not, and then following that trend.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it sounds a little bit like being a ghostwriter for someone, that you can really get those stories out and you can have them open up so that the brain is going to produce those, surface them, those things that maybe they don't think about, maybe they are not extroverted and they won't be able to bring this up on their own. But if you catalyze it, then they come to life that way.
Yeah. I think of it as a thought partner. I kind of realized this because I hosted a podcast for a
Mhm.
long time as well. And you kind of realize that the power, exactly what you're doing, the power of curiosity and the power of distance, right? You are showing up, you're curious about my experience, you have enough distance from it that you're asking questions that might even seem intuitive to me, or it might be one of those things from like, well, everyone knows this. But then you bring an outsider in and it's like, no, not everyone knows this, or I think people would find this interesting. So having that thought partner to be the outside observer of what others would benefit from.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a real skill. And that also brings in that human skill that, an AI is not going to be able to prompt that kind of questions, that kind of curiosity, that there's an emotional driver behind it. That's a very journalistic trait,
Yeah.
I suppose. That's a new form of journalism that you're practicing here, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And the type of person I hire to do that are ex-consultants, because they're really good. They're really good at coming into a business and understanding the objective and understanding how to get very senior people, because we work with CEOs of publicly traded companies and CEOs of smaller companies, like really getting very prominent people to open up and being comfortable interrupting or redirecting or pushing back. It really is a unique skill set.
Yeah, I love that. So that brings me to my next question. What drives growth in your business? How did you get in 40 years on the 5,000? What was
Yeah.
the engine here, the fuel?
It's so funny because whenever I ask this of every CEO I meet with as well to learn from them. Everyone always says referrals, so I'll be generic and say referrals does drive. It's probably the single biggest source of revenue. When I first started the company, I actually used LinkedIn, and so this actually came out of another company that I was running, and I had the idea. And so I went to LinkedIn and I said, I think that the type of person who would be interested in this is CEOs of companies with at least 50 employees. And, I put that into Sales Navigator and it came up with a couple hundred first degree connections. And I just sent out like a fairly generic message of, hey, Steve, just want to give you a quick update. I'm launching this new service and this is what we do. Let me know if you know of anyone who would like to chat. And I actually got, probably 60 or 70K in monthly recurring revenue from that, of people I wasn't really aware of what they were up to. Like one of the guys who's still a client, I had met with him 10 years previously when he was an investor. And then now he was CEO and founder of a company that ultimately went public. And so I wouldn't have thought of that person, but that's a great thing about LinkedIn, of saying like, here's someone who might be interested in what I'm doing. And so, that sort of outbound of warm connections has played a role. Obviously, I'm active on LinkedIn. I get a lot of leads from that. I do a fairly good job of keeping in touch with my network and seeing when people might be needing us. I think, back to the human connection, I do think conferences are playing a bigger role. I'm starting to go to more conferences and realizing the value of meeting people in person and how that kind of seems to accelerate the process of building trust and building relationship. We do cold email, we do AdWords, we do a newsletter, we do a lot of content marketing. And so I think each of them plays their own part, but referrals certainly is the biggest one. LinkedIn is probably number two.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And do you see a lot of competitors? Is this a crowded field?
It is. We have expanded beyond LinkedIn largely because of the competitive nature, where I think just as people have flocked to LinkedIn, a lot of, I would say the biggest faction is a lot of solopreneurs, a lot of individuals will kind of work with a few executives. And so that's kind of probably the lower level competitors. There are a handful of companies that are doing something similar to us, and then like more established PR companies that will say, yes, we do LinkedIn as well. But I think at this point, we've got the deepest track record of executives. We worked with over 400 now, which as far as I'm aware is the largest set. We actually present our data to LinkedIn every year because it is the largest data set of just executives rather than influencers. And I think the play for most professionals and most executives is different than what an influencer would do on a platform like LinkedIn. And I think it's important to do what's appropriate for an executive.
So you mentioned on your LinkedIn page that you bootstrapped this company to 3 million ARR.
Yep.
So what do you expect to be different from going from,
Oh,
60,000 monthly recurring, 700 ARR to 3 million to going from 3 million to 10 million? How is it going to
yeah.
be different?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I balance this because I really like Paul Graham's thought that like you have to do things that are not scalable to be able to scale. And so oftentimes I'm looking for things to do consistently, but it's really helpful for me not to constrain myself in that way and to think of things that, it still feels like guerrilla warfare at times of like, what are little things that we can do to get an edge? I think that the thing that I think about most right now in getting from 3 to 10 million is creating a machine for experimentation
Mhm.
and experimentation, not just in our service, but also in our sales and marketing. And so, how do we create a culture? Let's just take the service side of things. I never want our service to plateau. I have run a company before where our product became stale and a competitor put us out of business.
Mhm.
I never want that to happen again. And I think that the way that we minimize the probability that that happens is that we are always experimenting. We are always listening to our clients and understanding what else we could do to make their life better.
Mhm.
But then we're also looking at the market and thinking, what else might our clients not even realize they need, but would benefit from? And I love that, that phrase from Henry Ford, if I listened to my customers, I would have built a faster horse. I think that there's a value in listening to customers, but also a value in being one or two steps ahead of them. And so, for example, one of the things that we're heavily looking at right now is the thought of AI visibility for executives. And where GEO is getting more and more prominence for organizations, we see a world where it's very important not just to cultivate a human audience and a human group of people who view and like your content and respect you, but also essentially cultivating an AI audience and making sure that your content is visible by LLMs and making sure that Claude and Perplexity see you as the authority and are referencing you. And so that's something that our clients aren't yet asking for, but we're already developing a solution and a thesis because we think that that's the way that the world is going. But the central point is, how do we create an engine for experimentation so we are always testing out new things and seeing if they work and reinvesting in the ones that work and letting go the ones that don't work. And I think that if we can do that for our clients and for ourselves, it always keeps us evolving. We're always upping the game. We're always improving, because I think the moment that we stop doing that, that's when we stagnate, or that's when someone else comes along and puts us out of business.
So how do you maintain this alignment and this entrepreneurial energy? Because experimentation is innovation. It's this entrepreneurship in your business. How do you perpetuate it? So as you're growing the business, I don't know, you've got 40 people now. Maybe you're going to have more. You're going to have AI agents running around. So how do you keep that experimentation and this entrepreneurial energy as you are getting further and further from the newest hires?
I think so. The first thing that I love, and this is my VP of Ops, Shelby, came up with this, but I really like it. She instituted a 10-week cycle composed of 1 to 2 week sprints. And, she oversees all of our client work. So what she did is she broke everything we do for our clients into different sections. She instituted a system of saying, okay, these are all the different things we do. If you have an idea about how to do something better, or if you have a complaint about how something's not working, or if a client mentions something, I want you to put it in this spreadsheet so we can keep track of how we can improve each thing. And what we're going to do is this week, we're doing a sprint on interview questions, how we prepare our interview questions for our clients. We are going to invest a week sprint in improving that process through technology, AI, and processes. And then we're going to go through every other aspect. But guess what? 10 weeks later, we're coming back to interview questions again. What that does, I think, in today's landscape is not only does that keep us always thinking of improving something, but every 10 weeks, we're re-looking at specifically AI to see like, what are its capabilities now? Like it's changing so quickly from 10 weeks ago, it might be able to do something better or different. So let's create a system so that we are periodically refreshing every aspect of our business from a team feedback, a client feedback, but also technological improvements. And it's mind-boggling to think that that's the pace now, and that 10 weeks might not even be sufficient in the future with the rate at which things are changing. That's kind of the best example I can think of how we're trying to create that mindset of constant and incessant improvement.
Mm-hmm. And how do you build your team? Are you remote or you have an office somewhere?
We are all remote. Yeah, we are 100% remote. So we're in 7 different states, all still in the United States. You know, it does pose challenges as you grow of how do you get in person and create connection. And so we'll do things like happy hours online and different ways to get to know each other. But I also think, you know, for those others listening who create a remote first culture, I think it kind of, you filter for people who thrive in that environment and do their best work when they have a fair amount of autonomy. And I think that autonomy for us has been helpful because we want people who are individual problem solvers. And I think that overlaps well with people who prefer a remote first workplace.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So if you had a magic wand and you could fix one thing in your business in the next 12 months, what would you do that? What would you do?
That is a really good question. I mean, I think it almost it almost feels like the world is moving towards more entrepreneurs, not fewer ones, which I, for one, like. I'm a huge fan of both entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs. But if I could wave a magic wand, it would be making everyone on the team think like an entrepreneur, which would have probably been a liability 12 months ago. But I think that, you know, the way I approach everything now is, you know, I literally right before this was I use Claude for my personal finances. On the business side, it is now connected to QuickBooks. And on the personal side, I have a system of creating a report exactly the way I want it, which I, for one, love the capability of AI to personalize things. I don't have to use Mint or QuickBooks anymore. I can build it exactly in the way that works for my crazy brain. But I was updating and realizing that the tools have changed. And so like upgrading the way that I track my personal finances. And that's just kind of very natural for me. And I do that for my kids' menus. And I do that for like everything. I kind of have a project or an approach on AI. And I think that that's a similar mindset that I need for my team is like thinking like an entrepreneur. Like, how do you get better at everything? How do you get more efficient at everything? How do you look for new ways of solving things? I think it used to be that the entrepreneur was the visionary and setting the vision for the company, and everyone was more or less following orders or a system. And I still see a role for the visionary, but it's almost as if everyone on the team has to be their own visionary of envisioning how to improve their workflow and how to make themselves more productive and how to utilize tools and realize where that can make them more effective. And I don't know that it's going to be top down anymore. I think that, you know, the advantage of the tools we have today is like the way that I use AI, Steve, might be completely different than the way that you use it. And that's the beauty of it, is that like our brains are different, our worldviews are different, our skill sets are different, but we can almost bolt this technology on us to make ourselves superhuman. But the way that it works for you is going to be different than me. And I think that will be true in a team. So very long answer, but if I could wave that magic wand, it would be imparting that entrepreneur mindset of like finding problems and the best way to solve them and never stop solving problems.
Yeah, so it's just a feeling, and maybe I won't articulate it well, but I'm just looking at your business. You're building this remote team, and then you're making everyone more autonomous so that they are working with AI to improve their productivity. In a way, it is supercharging everyone individually, but what about the team cohesion? So how do you
Mm,
make sure that people don't get isolated? You know, Isaac Asimov has a novel which is on a distant future on a distant planet, and basically everyone has 1,000 robots, and everyone is in their own world, and they just communicate on video screen because personal contact is no longer even appropriate, and everyone gets super rich and super efficient, but something gets lost. So I wonder, how do you see the tension between empowering people, having AI help everyone being super productive on their individual way in a remote culture? How do you keep this constellation together going forward?
yeah. I think it still comes back to human connection for me. I think that, let's just say on a client level, if my company is doing our job well with our clients, if we are having them become thought leaders, having them grow influence and audience, I want that to lead to more human connection to them. And the way that I've seen that showing up is they go to a conference and people know them and people come up. Like people are literally, they might not have created connection before, but they recognize them, they know who they are, and that draws them to in-person interactions. That's human connection coming out of what we do. I think for our team, I hope it leads to more human connection, that as we become more efficient, as we become better at what we do, as the company grows, we will get together in person more often. We'll be able to be in the room together and brainstorm because that becomes more valuable, and we're all craving that. So sci-fi is my favorite genre of literature and cinema. And I don't think that we will ultimately end up with VR goggles in our head and not talking to each other. I think that in the same way that we have seen with social media, that it has a purpose, but like we still want to be around each other and benefit from being in person. Like I think that we will become more and more like that. I don't think it will drive us apart. I think it will lead to more connection. That's my optimist's view on it.
Yeah, love it. Well, I hope you're right. I definitely
Yeah.
okay, so if someone who is a founder of a business, a growing business, or maybe a C-level in an enterprise, and they don't have time to manage their LinkedIn, but they realize that they're missing out with their thought leadership and they need help or they want to explore, where should they go and how can they connect with you and your colleagues?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would just say in general, every leader needs to know that their personal brand is going to impact both their career as well as their company, and them being able to articulate their viewpoints and what they think and believe is going to be a vital skill. And that could be on stage at a conference. It could be on YouTube. It could be on LinkedIn. It could be in a book. It could be in articles, but they have to have a way to know what they believe, to know what knowledge they have that is valuable, and find a way to add value to others. I think that that's just more and more the direction things are going. And it can be really hard because you are probably growing an empire. You are probably doing so many different things. And just know that there are people like Executive Presence where our skill set is figuring out where your zone of genius is and figuring out what stories you have that are really good assets and figuring out who you are and how you want to present online. And then helping you do that consistently across different channels. And so if that's of interest, I obviously love talking about this stuff, but I'm happy to talk with anyone who listens to the show. If you go to executivepresence.io and fill out our contact form, it gets to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Justin Nassiri, or my email's justin@executivepresence.io. Any of those three work. But I just believe that this is going to be more and more valuable for leaders to develop that skill, and would love to help anyone listening do that.
Well, if you're out there listening, you see that something is working because Justin propelled his company from a standing start to the Inc. 5000 in 3 years, 3 or 4 years. And he is pushing the envelope on generative AI and reinvention every 10 weeks of his company. So if you like to be part of that and you have to take advantage of promoting yourself on LinkedIn with a cutting edge approach, then reach out to Justin Nassiri on LinkedIn or executivepresence.io. And if you enjoyed this conversation, stay tuned because every week I bring a couple of successful entrepreneurs who are sharing their frameworks of how they're being successful. So thanks for coming, Justin, and thanks for listening. I appreciate you listening today. Stay connected. Sign up for my free weekly newsletter at steveperito.com/newsletter.